the topic of the research I'm going to present is estimating the use and preservation values of national parks tourism resources using a contingent valuation method. Okay, this is the citation of the research, and here's the content of my presentation. First, I will introduce the background of the research, then I will explain the methodology, results, conclusion, and followed by my personal reflection. So the first part is the introduction. About 7 of every 10 Koreans visited national parks in South Korea in 1999, indicating the popularity of national parks in South Korea as tourist sites. And a considerable amount of money was required to manage these parks. And the average management cost was 3,700 won. One is Korean dollars, which is approximately $3 per visitor. And this management cost greatly exceeds the current admission fee, which is 1,000 won per visitor. So this means that a large portion of the amount of money needed to manage the parks comes from the Korean government, and only a small part comes from revenues. And this indicates that government support is critical for the management of these parks. However, due to slow economic growth, the Korean government might consider to cut the budget to reduce expenditures. And to offset this budget cut, the National Park Authority might consider increasing admission fees to maintain the quality of the natural environment. Therefore, if the economic values of these parks can be assessed, this might convince the government to continue to support the management fund, or the values can justify for an increase in admission fees. Therefore, the purpose of this research is to estimate the use and preservation values of natural and or cultural resources in 5 distinctive national parks. And the use values refer to actual recreational use, whereas the preservation value refers to non-use value, which means the value for retaining the opportunity for possible future use or the money for preservation for future generations. Okay. Now I will introduce the study sites for this research, which are the 5 national parks. So the first park is called Mount Soraksan. This represents a mountain-oriented resource. And Mount Pukhansan is also another mountain-oriented resource. The next park, Mount Kayasan, represents a culture-oriented resource. Hoyohaesan represents a marine-oriented resource. And the last park, Taeanhaean, represents a beach-oriented resource. Okay, regarding the methodology, the researchers applied the contingent valuation method, CVM, and this method was commonly used to measure the economic values of non-market goods. And according to Lee in 1997, this method basically attempts to ascertain from respondents what they would be willing to pay under certain hypothetical market scenarios. And the reasons why the researchers chose this method as opposed to other methods were because that it's able to value trips with multiple purposes or multi-destinations. Also, it's the only approach to elicit existence benefits of environment amenity from both the users and non-users. And remember, the purpose of this research was to measure both use and non-use values. Okay, and they also adopted a dichotomous choice approach, also called closed-ended approach. And in this approach, the researcher has to randomly choose a price from a range of predetermined prices in a pretest, from a pretest. So let's say, for example, if I randomly chose a price at $300, then I would ask the respondents, are you willing to pay $300? And they simply have to answer either yes or no. And this is easier for participants to make decisions because most people are familiar with discrete choices in market transactions. And also it's very simple to answer. And the next approach I'm going to introduce to you is called open-ended. And I only introduce these 2 elicitation techniques because these are the ones used in this particular research. Okay, so here's a simple open-ended question. So for example, if I say that if this service can improve the environment, so how much are you willing to pay for this service? And the respondents can name any price. So for example, I can just say 350 or 1,020, etc. And they conducted a pretest in Mount Kayasan National Park. And they used open-ended approach to ask tourists' maximum WTP. So this means that they asked the respondents, what is the maximum amount of money you're willing to pay to enter this park? And from the results, they selected these 9 offers. As for the formal research, they chose well-trained students to conduct face-to-face interview on site. The participants included 2,300 visitors leaving national parks, meaning that they have already experienced the natural resources. And the duration of the study was during peak summer vacation period in 1999. And the payment vehicle for use value was admission fees, and they chose tax as a payment vehicle for preservation value. And I will explain this further later in the sample questions. Okay, so there are 4 parts in the questionnaire. First part are questions on measurements of recreation use and preservation values. Second part are items on push and pull factors. Push factors are factors that push tourists away from the parks, and pull factors are factors that attract tourists to the park. And the third part are items on environmental attitudes. And the last part are questions on demographic characteristics. Okay, so here is the question pertaining use value. It says, if the national park provides you with opportunities for appreciating natural and or cultural resources, hiking and resting, and it charges X1. Okay, X1 here is a randomly selected price from the predetermined prices. So let's say if I select 2001, okay, as an admission fee per person, would you be willing to pay for it? Okay, notice here they've used admission fee as a payment vehicle for use value. So this is what payment vehicle refers to. And the respondents simply have to answer either yes or no to this price. Okay, here's the question pertaining preservation value. X2 here is another randomly selected price, and they selected tax as the payment vehicle for preservation value. Okay, here comes the equations for statistical analysis. And B here represents indirect utility, Y is income, A is an offer, S are the socio-economic characteristics, and these two are identically independent.